Hello, so what we're going to be doing in this video is we are going to go ahead and take the energy.py program that we created previously, and we are going to run that through the Python visualizer tool just to see what happens at both a global and a local scope concerning our variables and what happens when we call our kinetic energy function. So let me just go ahead and copy this code, and what I need to do next is I need to open up my visualizer tool. So visualizer tool, let me go back to my home here really quick. If you scroll on down, it's under the Python resource material. So I will click on it. I will scroll down to my visualizer tool, click on that link, and then I will click on Python Tutor. So let me just go ahead and paste this code in. Don't worry about the version of Python that we're currently running. It will run 3.8 code just fine, even though it lists write code in Python 3.6, so you can disregard the version there. So what we need to do is we need to visualize our execution. So let me just go ahead and click on the button. So our first line, when the Python interpreter reads the program, it sees our function definition. So since what it will do is it'll skip over the actual execution of the function, because in order to execute the function, we must call the function, which we are doing on line number 9. So let me go ahead and click on next. It'll drop down where we're prompting the user to enter the mass. So I will go ahead and enter my mass. It'll be 12.333. I click on submit. And then what you can see within the global scope is that variable name mass has been created, and we've saved 12.333 into that variable. So let me go ahead and enter my velocity. So I will go ahead and enter 20.123 and click on submit. So now it's created a variable underneath my global scope of the program, and the value is 20.123. So on line 9, what we're doing is we're calling our kinetic energy function, and we are passing in the values that are stored in our mass variable and in our velocity variable into our function, because our function expects two parameters or arguments to get passed into that function. So let's go ahead and click on the next button and see what happens. So when I call that function and my mass and velocity get passed into the function, they get saved into M and V. So right now what I have is I have two variables at the kinetic energy local scope. So those are the variables, values and values that are going to be used when we go ahead and actually calculate our kinetic energy. So let's go ahead and click on next. So what we're doing is on line number 4 is we're calculating the kinetic energy, and then we are going to return that value back into our calling, the statement where we called that function, and save it in our KE variable. So let's click on next again. So now we have a return value that was calculated, 24970325. That gets returned and saved in our KE variable. So let me just go ahead and click on next. So it has now been saved in my KE variable, and then what we're going to do on our final line of code, line number 11, it'll go ahead and print that value out. It'll format my output with 2 decimal places to the right of the decimal when we specified this format specifier. So let me just click on next. And now if we look at our output is 2497.03. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back into my program here. And what I'm going to do is I am going to actually update the values of my my global variables. So I am going to change the first instead of calling it mass, I am going to call it velocity or m, and instead of calling it velocity, I will call it v. So let me just go ahead and visualize the execution of the program now. So I will go ahead and run. I will go ahead and click on 1233, click on submit. I will go ahead and click on 20.123, click on submit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to call my function right here. So let's just go ahead and click on the next button. And what happens is we get a name error. Name mass is not defined. So what we need to do is we need to change our function call. So instead of passing in mass and velocity, we're passing in m and v. So let me just go back to the previous screen. And what I want to do is I want to update my function call. So now I'm passing in m and v. And now we will go ahead, visualize the execution. Close that, click on next. We'll enter our 12.333, click on submit. We'll enter our 10.123, click on submit. Okay, so now we're going to call our function. We'll click on next. So now what happens is two additional variables named m and v get created, but those two variables are at the local scope, not the global scope. So it's just a coincidence that they have the same name, but they do not point to the same memory locations in memory. So what I have now is I have a local m and a local v. So we will go ahead, run through the program. So we will calculate the value. We have our return value. Oh, okay, I inputted the wrong value, so that's why my return value is a little bit different from the previous run. So let me just go ahead and click on next. And when I click on next, once we exit the function, all of the variables that were created at the local scope no longer exist. So now what we still have our m and v variables, which were created at the global scope. So I will just go ahead, click on next, and what gets printed out is my kinetic energy. So I hope this video helps you understand what happens when you call a function and where variables exist at the local versus global scope.